William Foster, a biologist, is employed by Bay Andine Industries in Puerto Rico. Under Jones's instruction, he looks into the issue of transplanting the consciousness of the deceased into a synthetic shell along with his coworker and friend Edward Whittle. The body of the deceased Surgeon Kelly, who will serve as a Donna for an experiment, is delivered to the scene by helicopter. The soldier passed away unexpectedly while engaged in action, had no notion he would be revived, and of course, refused to give his assent to the treatment. When the container containing the body is brought into the operation room, the entire team quickly congregates there. Even though it had been more than 7 hours after his death, researchers were still able to read and capture his memory by connecting to the donor's cerebral brain through the tear duct. The memory imprint of Sergeant Kelly is then put into a synthetic brain that is attached to a mechanical sheath. The optical and auditory barriers allow the test subject to come to, 3, 4, 5, and regain consciousness. He possesses human reflexes, mechanical hands that move, the ability to see and hear. He goes crazy and starts to cripple himself without realizing what he is when he examines himself and realizes that he is enclosed in a robot body, and William cuts the subject off from the power supply. Foster views the specimen's speech as a breakthrough because the test subjects had previously been mute, but Jones, the lab manager, chastises him for failing the test. Will, Mona, Sophie, Matt, and Zoe will be spending the weekend together. A friend and co-worker of Will's family pays the Fosters a visit before they go on vacation. Ed tells Mona that the experiment was a flop. On the other hand, as the topic begins to speak, Will is delighted and tells Mona about it. Mona, however, believes that all of his experiments are inhumane and worries that they could cause harm to others. William only has a scientific perspective on the matter. He is sure that he can save a lot of people whose lives are abruptly ended. Mona is thinking about the moral side of things in the interim. She holds that people are more than just their neurochemistry, electrical signals, and memories. Perhaps a person has a soul or something deeper. Mona worries that one day her husband may go too far and cease making the distinction between right and wrong. But Will assures you that this won't occur. The Fosters leave in clear weather during the day, but as dusk falls, a deluge starts, swiftly intensifying and making visibility poor. When William surprised us with a truck on the tight lane at the last second, Mona suggested stopping to wait out the weather. A few seconds later, a thunderstorm causes a tree to fall, killing Mona as it hits the automobile. Will errs, allowing the automobile to fly off the road and into the pond. William brings his wife and kids' remains to the shore, none of them survived. Edward will be affected by grief and will beg him for assistance. Will convince Ed to take pictures of his loved ones when he gets to the accident scene. The plan is rejected by his friend, who offers to call an ambulance or the police, but William, who is insane, won't budge and makes him run a brain scanning program. William and Edward eventually make it to the facility where they plan to clone Will's family. Ed cautions that the most difficult aspect of cloning is not that it is illegal and immoral, but rather the unpredictable outcomes and the likelihood of receiving people with physiological anomalies. Will is instructed by Ed to be ready to end the experiment if he makes a mistake. Additionally, he emphasizes his personal opposition to the concept and his belief that it is immoral. Will, however, is in a difficult situation and certain that they are trustworthy. It also serves as a reminder that consciousness transfer technology is still in its infancy and has numerous drawbacks. Most crucially, they have never transferred memories to a replicate. William, however, is unable to objectively weigh the hazards due to his feelings of sadness and despair. Ed gives Will the directive to be prepared to stop the experiment if he makes a mistake. He also highlights his moral objection to the idea and his personal hostility to it. Will, though, is in a precarious position and confident in their reliability. Additionally, it serves as a reminder that consciousness transfer technology is still in its early stages and has a number of disadvantages. Most importantly, they've never given a replicate memory. However, William's melancholy and despair prevent him from weighing the risks rationally. Will makes the decision to revive Mona, Sophie, and Matt while erasing any traces of Zoe from their memories. He then loses his cool and becomes enraged. The following day, police arrive at Foster's home to inquire about many car battery thefts that had occurred in the neighborhood, but he immediately dismisses them by claiming ignorance. Foster doesn't show up for work after the weekend, and Edward tells his supervisors that William has pneumonia. Jones, however, insists that the work on the test subjects 3, 4, and 5 be completed by a certain date in order to avoid their department being closed down and everyone being fired. Foster then leaves for work, leaving Ed in charge of keeping an eye on the tanks in the garage. William runs into the teacher from the boys' school who Ed had misled about the boy's illness and absence when he gets home. William is urged by Edward to phone the clinic where his wife works and to inform the school directly of the children's absence rather than involving him in the web of falsehoods. William borrows family members' laptops and smartphones and starts writing letters to everyone, the school's principal, and the kids' pals on social media. After 17 days, William has still not been able to replicate a human consciousness transfer. This indicates that there might be issues if memories are tried to be transferred to Mona. Additionally, it is no longer possible to keep the shells and children's clones in the tanks because they will quickly start to age. The clones are extracted by William and Edward, who then put them into a coma caused by a sedative. Both astonished and ecstatic, Ed. Since they were able to create flawless clones without any negative effects. Foster still has 3 more days until the tranquilizers start to harm the replicants' bodies. Will keeps running into things that make him think about Zoe. Foster realizes that his touch affects the readings of the clone's brain activity when he administers another tranquilizer injection to his wife. Will understands that the mechanical shell will always be rejected by the unconscious organic, living human brain and that the problem of consciousness transfer can never be resolved. He then tells Edward Will about his discovery. Is sure that his loved one's consciousness will seamlessly and trouble-free transition into their new, living bodily bodies. He also provides a solution for the test subjects 3, 4, and 5. Believing it is possible to replace sensation utilizing stolen technologies at home in order to deceive the brain. The memories of the Will family members are implanted into the clones' brains by William and Edward. The first person to transition is Mona. She initially rejects the shell, which results in spasms, but once her vitals stabilize, she regains consciousness. She is briefly put to sleep by Will. While his new family is sleeping, Ed will place an engagement ring on his wife's hand as he celebrates his accomplishment and dreams of winning the Nobel Prize. Will conceals photos of Zoe, erases her presence from the house, and removes any traces of her existence while under the influence of tranquilizers. The following morning, William finds his family assembled in the kitchen and keeps a close eye on their behavior. Edward abruptly contacts Foster to come to the lab so they can continue working on the test subject 3, 4, 5, and 6. When a fresh donor is brought in, it is discovered that his brain has been severely damaged and he would not consent to the process of transferring his consciousness into a synthetic shell. And he is reminded that they both run the prospect of going to jail if the project is abandoned because the lab will be informed of the disappearance of the pricey equipment. Foster uses the memory reading equipment to imprint his own mind, endangering his eye in the process. Will tells his friend that he is going to put his neurocard into the subject's 3, 4, or 5 synthetic brains and design an algorithm that will lead the subject's consciousness to believe that it is connected to his body at home as the device enters the cortex through the T duct. An nervous woman who is unable to recall the last 3 weeks of her life welcomes William. Will tucks her into bed after calming her down and blaming her agitation on weariness. Well, he spends the evening creating an algorithm to deceive his mind into adjusting to the artificial shell. Sophie has a dream at night that her mother is dying, and the young girl screams in terror. Will walks in at that precise moment to reassure her that it was just a nightmare. Sophie's father carries her to the garage and erases her memories of the accident out of fear of a relapse. Suddenly, Mona shows in and demands an explanation after spotting Sophie connected to the memory machines. Mona learns from William that she and her children were all replicas and that they all perished in an accident. One gets startled and attempts to understand what is going on. Will reassures Mona that she is a completely normal living being and explains that he resurrected her because he was unable to handle their loss following the accident. He asks her to keep everything a secret. The kids and Mona start asking questions about who So is during dinner. It turns out that Will hasn't had time to get rid of all that belonged to his dead daughter. Jones, who has learned about William's covert experiment, now shows up to the foster home. He refers to Mona, Sophie, and Matt as the company's property and declares his intention to get rid of them due to the possibility of scandal. Will ultimately consents to give up the algorithm for shifting awareness and enters the home. When he comes back, he tackles Jones, knocks him out, and then uses the algorithm to wipe out the hard drive. Will admits to Mona that Zoe is their daughter, whom he has been unable to revive and erase from the memories of the others. He warns his wife that they must go right away or I will go looking for them and kill them. The entire family rushes out of the house. The family escapes after William removes Zoe's memory imprint from the garage. In the microwave, Jones discovers the melted disc and detects males. To find the foster children, Will explains that by implanting bacon in every test subject, which makes them visible everywhere. Even though they are still too young to understand what is happening, the kids also discover that they are replicants in this fashion. Mona insists that before they leave, Foster must take them to the clinic and turn off the beacons using a defibrillator. Mona and Foster will then take the kids out of the hospital after doing this. The family gathers at the pier to board Edward's boat, but Mona and the kids are abducted by Jones's help while Will is seeking for the keys. Will eventually makes it to the lab. Ed was coerced into framing the Fosters, it turns out. After the incident, he neglected to properly dispose of the remains, which allowed Jones to learn about the experiment. William makes an effort to impose his will and demands that Jones release his family. Jones, though, controls him by threatening Mona first, then shooting Edward. Foster surprisingly consents to give up the algorithm. He modifies the algorithm to add consciousness to the mechanical shell and slips a memory imprint into the test subject's artificial brain. 3, 4, 5, and 6. William hands Jones a USB drive with a recording of the show on it and requests that he release the family. Jones responds that the animals are merely imitations and that he will carry out the experiment. This moment. Subjects 3, 4, and 5 enter as he diverts attention and captures the god's Foster along with his wife and kids. They then flee the lab, followed by Mona, Sophie, and Matt Kit in the car. But, returning to Jones, William talks to Subject 3, 4, 5, and realizes that he is comfortable in a mechanical shell. They each offer Jones a bargain. Jones does, however, end up dying from a concussion. In the end, Will the android decides to remain in the lab and keep an eye on the Fosters while the Bi and I refrain from pursuing them. Then he orders William to look after the family. Will bids himself and Edward, who is now dead, farewell before leaving. After some time, a 3, 4, and 5 clones Jones by imprinting his memory on them. Will returns tiny Zoe to the family after 17 days because he was able to save her life. Mona recognizes and remembers her youngest daughter, after all. Later, in Dubai, the revived Jones gets ready to clone a very wealthy elderly man. Android Will, aka Subject, handles the memory transfer. 3rd, 4th, 5th,